when I first got out, like I was in a place where I wasn't sure I wanted to live anymore. I just I didn't know what it was, but I was tired of hurting. I was tired of being in pain. Even though I had a yoga practice, and yoga practice helped me a lot, and a meditation practice and mindfulness had helped me a lot. But there were some really core things that I'd never dealt with, that I had to deal with to move on as a human and as a veteran.
This is Charlie Mike, the podcast. Veterans helping veterans, talking about things happening in the veteran community, things we've experienced and overcome, such as addictions, PTSD, depression, legal trouble. And we also promote veteran-owned businesses. If you're talking about it, we're talking about it. This is Charlie Mike, the podcast.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Charlie Mike, the podcast. As always, I'm your host, Raul, and your co-host is William.
Yo, what's going on, y'all? Thanks for joining us again. We've had an amazing run of guests come on, and it's fun to kind of get into our groove and really discover everybody else's passions, everybody else's missions. And I'm glad to be doing it alongside you, Raul.
Man, I pretty know the honors mine. Have I told you that lately?
Very, very few times, but yes. So I'm excited for this guest. We have Mr. Phil from American Yogi on. We met him through a mentorship group that Raul and I, because it was always about getting better. And I fell in love with his story. If you don't know, I also myself try and practice yoga. It's just mindfulness. It's trying to become aware of who we are. And getting uncomfortable in some of those positions. And of course, the more uncomfortable you become, the better we all become. And so without further ado, trying to go too much into his bio, let's bring on Mr. Phil. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, welcome. We really appreciate you joining us. Where are you joining us from today?
St. Pete, Florida.
Wow.
Man, it looks nice. That background is nice.
Oh, it's beautiful. My little backyard.
So you were in the Army, correct?
I was.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey? What caused you to join the Army?
Yeah, I think like most guys from our generation, 9/11 was a huge factor. I think I was 15, 16 years old when the towers got hit, and I remember, watching the planes hit on TV, and it affected me pretty profoundly. But I found a different path for a couple of years, and I was a photojournalist for a little while. I went overseas, worked for a photo agency in Israel for a little bit. Decided that conflict photojournalism was going to be my path, but I always felt this itch to get back to us. So I came back and I started contracting for the Army. So I spent about a year working up at Fort Lewis, Washington, and then it was only a few months in that I realized that everything that I was doing was sort of just circling around which is what I really wanted to do, which was to be a soldier. So I ended up commissioning in 2012, and I became an armor officer. Spent a few years in the Cav, deployed once there. Had a good time. I wanted to move on, and found my way to Special Operations Civil Affairs. Broke my back along the way, but kept on pushing through. Finally retired about just over a year ago, after 10 years, medical retirement.
Very similar story, huh?
Yeah, I do definitely. Well, some parts. I mean, he's a badass.
I don't know about that.
No, I think it's an amazing thing. We've had a few guests come on that are prior to 9/11, and it's always interesting to hear that story, because like you said, we all have this, especially for us post 9/11 folks. We saw what happened. We saw a higher calling, and although it took us a little longer. I actually spent 2 years after high school trying to discover myself or go to college before I actually joined too. So I kind of hear that same similarities.
You brought up 9/11. Now, we when we have guests on and they bring that up, I always like to ask, where exactly were you? Do you remember the moment you witnessed or heard?
Yeah, I remember exactly where I was. I was in school, and we were like just settling into, I guess, homeroom, like first class of the day. And I just remember sitting there, and one of my buddies ran into the room like out of breath. Like it seemed like he was just playing around. It's something about, planes, hit building, New York, and then we went to the library, and I remember watching the first building burning, the first tower burning, and then I just stayed there, transfixed on the TV, and they were trying to get us to go back in the room and just carry on with school. And I said, this is obviously something really important, and I want to witness this. And I remember watching the second plane hit as we were standing there in the library watching the feed. And then I think they called an assembly and then told us kind of what was going on and sent us home. That was it. And then we spent the rest of the day. My mother and my brother was in college already. My dad was traveling. The two of us just sat and watched the towers burn and fall and watch people jumping out of buildings. And yeah, I remember exactly. I remember the feeling. I remember everything about it.
It's amazing how much a lot of our attention was on that day and how much we all kind of remember it. And it feels very similar, right? I mean, where were you at or I meant like geographically, where were you growing up when this happened?
Oh, I was in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the
And
crazy
so,
thing about 9/11 is no matter where you were across the country, like we all had like such a similar experience.
yeah, it's so surreal to be able to, and I remember because we were all drawn to the TVs and we're all like, this, I can't believe this is going on. And then for all of us to witness the second tower get hit, um, it's surreal.
Yeah, it definitely is. Just now, it brings back emotions
Yeah.
and things of that nature. Yeah. You know what? Tell us a little bit about your upbringing. So you're from Florida, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I was raised in Tampa. I guess a pretty normal upbringing. Yeah, I was into wrestling when I was in high school, and I think that I discovered my real passion for for leadership and being on a team. I think that was something that I always craved after that. Went to college. It was sort of the thing to do. My family, I didn't come from a military family, pulled my community, but I always kind of felt it. I always felt like it was something I wanted to do. And our assistant wrestling coach as well he was in the Army. I remember that was my first kind of interaction with anyone, armed forces. And I was a dude I looked up. I think I started playing, really, eventually with wrestling. And I think that's what maybe want to be on a bigger team someday.
Interesting. And I love that that you talk about that a little bit about the upgrading. My son, he's 10 and he just got into wrestling himself. And coming from that army background and being exposed to combatives, I wanted him to be in some type of physical sport. And we tried jujitsu for a little. We had a couple of trial sessions, and then he tried wrestling, and he just fell in love with it. He just liked the pace of it. Did you have a similar experience like that, where you just kind of?
I sucked at it from day one. I was terrible. I was overweight, and I was couldn't put string moves together, and I was uncoordinated, and I liked. And I think that's sort of the first time in my life I realized really hard things. Because I enjoyed being really bad at it. I enjoyed, having to fight uphill. And it took me, a solid 6. There was nothing else. I didn't like any ball sports. I wasn't coordinated enough for basketball. I didn't like soccer. Wrestling was the only thing that I realized with enough I could be successful. And I went from not winning a single match my first year to doing pretty damn well by the time I finished. And I ended up coaching later on. But yeah, that. Yeah, it was, I wanted to quit a couple times, and, my father, my coach kind of kept me in the game. And I don't think I'd be half of who I am now if I didn't have those lessons, during my formative years.
Yeah, so you decided to join the army around, you said, what was it, 2012?
Mhm.
Yeah, commission.
Nice, 2012. So what college did you graduate from, or what was your degree in?
Yeah, so my first one was photojournalism. That was up in Boston University, and I was really linked in with ROTC there, and that's when I realized I wanted to be a conflict photographer because I enjoyed going in the field with them. I liked the environment, and that's when I went overseas to Israel. Well, during my first time in college. Last thing I wanted to do is go to school to study. I just wanted to go do things out in the world. But then, I came back home. I was out of money, and I was living with my parents, and signed up for the University of South Florida. walked in and asked if they'd give me a scholarship if I gave them my time, and that was it.
That's awesome. And so do you still do some of the photography now?
I do a bit for my company, but really, no, I don't, I remember distinctly I was out at NTC in 2008 working for the Northwest Guardian out of Fort Lewis, and I'm sitting I got picked up from the like Barstow Airport, and I'm sitting in the front of some like I don't know, if it was LMTV or something with some soldier, and he's like, "What are you guys doing out here?" 'Cause it was me and a writer, and I was like, "I'm here to take pictures and tell the story of what you guys are doing." And he said, "Why? People need to see what you guys are doing, the work you're putting in, and how you're training." And he said, "Why?" They just kept on grilling me on it. I was like, it's something I just believed in. I just thought people should know. Whereas the soldier was like, it doesn't really matter. I'm not doing it for anybody else. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but now that I served, I went overseas a few times. I went through my own hardship in the army. When I got out on the other side, I don't that's my path to make an impact instead. So as a outside of taking pictures of shirts for the company and my family, and I try to make an impact in other ways now.
Pretty cool.
So for those of the for those of people that do not know, what is conflict photography?
So anytime that it's kind of different now. When I started taking pictures years back, there smartphones weren't a thing. Smartphones weren't around. So if there was a conflict happening, the only photos you were seeing from it were of professional photographers that went over there with their gear and got in. They had to find the fight and drove up or flew in and put themselves in the pit to show what's happening. And that's what I did in Israel. And that was a pretty incredible experience. So like we had like a sat phone we had to hook up to our laptop to transmit photos back, and then those made it to the international wires, and then those got published. Now it's a little different. It's like you look at Ukraine, people are just taking videos on cell phones and pictures with cell phones and posting on social media. So I don't really know what the state of conflict photojournalism or photography is these days. I know back in the day it was um, it was a profession. Those of us that went to tell a story that nobody else could tell.
I'm pretty sure it's still alive and well. Even with the cameras that we have on our phones, they're still not as good as the professional ones. And then be
Yeah.
able to actually see the art from a different form on hey, this is going to make a good image, and then the story behind the pictures goes a long way, I think.
Yeah, what's the saying? The picture speaks better than the words.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the saying. I
It's
may have
pretty
just made
close.
that up.
Hey, you know what? Trademark that.
Trademark copyright by Raul Moran.
So let's go into a little bit of your military service. You spent 10 years total. How is it being in the armor? What was that exposure like?
I mean when I first got there to Benning, I was one of the first classes out of Benning. I used to do it out of Fort Knox. So they build up the maneuver school down there. So we were still sort of breaking ground. But I got down there and I was thrown into the world of tanks. And at first it's like every kid's dream, right? Like get behind it. I got to drive a tank, got to shoot a tank, got to learn how to maneuver it. It was a lot of fun. Um, but like quickly I realized like that wasn't me, especially we got onto the scout side of the house. And once I got into the cavalry side, I loved it. Like I get to go out there and just walk a long distance or, drive and then get out and go look at things and tell people about it. Nobody's going to dictate what I have to do because they're not there with me. Like I loved the idea of the cavalry of scouting. So, I quickly finagled my way away from tanks and into the world of reconnaissance. And I loved it. I had a great time. Getting to the line, the personality types that are drawn to reconnaissance suited me really well. I love it and the responsibility of that job, and it turned really well to what I ended up doing later on in civil affairs too.
Mm. Yeah, and I love how there's a parallel between what you're doing in the photography world, especially being on your own, trying to get information from others, and how that can kind of translate. Even though you got assigned armor, that you still found your own niche within that to really grow, leading over to scouting. And then you mentioned briefly about some of your civil affairs. So, is there something that sticks out within that community that you can share with us?
You mean about being in the civil affairs world?
Yeah, yeah, the civil affairs world.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people don't know what civil affairs, is. We're under like the special operations umbrella. You've got obviously SOAR, and you've got BAT, but you've also got special forces, psychological operations, and civil affairs, and we're like the soft umbrella in the army. So when like SF, like so I was in Syria my last deployment. It was a soft mission. It was special forces, civil affairs, psychological operations, and obviously the enablers, all piled onto one mission, with each of our niche. And the kind of the parallel between what I used to do into civil affairs, it was, we're trusted on a small team to go out and essentially tell others what's happening, gain information, leveraging relationships, creating, civil networks to leverage for whether it's for, information or whatever the Army's use is. Um, yeah, it's a lot of responsibility for a little team.
Yeah, yeah.
I know. I feel like that world is different. I'm being an
Definitely
infantryman
different.
as big army. I kind of understand a little bit about what they do, uh, but of course, they're in the civil affairs in the soft community. You also mentioned that, or we know that this is where you got your injury and kind of exposed you to what you're doing now. So, can you kind of take us to that? How did you end up hurting yourself or breaking your back?
Yeah, it was actually just a few. It was 2 weeks before I was supposed to go to selection, and I broke my back. I was on a gunnery range. We were riding around in Strikers, trying to proof targets, and I was on the range, and it was my responsibility to make sure that everything was good to go for when the guys got out the next week. So we're proofing targets. I stand up on my seat to check out this really far target, and I can't see it. So I get up a little higher. I'm on my tippy toes on the back edge of the seat of the TC seat, and then all of a sudden my foot slips, and then my back crunches, on the metal bar on the inside of the striker, and laid out right there, fractured L2, L3, like lumbar, just straight across the bones. And I was laid out on the floor of the striker. It was easily the most pain I've ever felt in my life. It was absolutely, it was terrible. I ended up standing back up and proofing the range for another couple hours in some pretty blinding pain. And then when that was done, they had to drag me back to the back of the truck and strap me in. And I had to bounce up and down with my back just compressing for another couple hours to get back. And then it took a few guys to get me out of the striker into a car and into the hospital. And then that's when they told me that my back was broken, and I thought my career was over. I thought everything that I'd wanted to do in the military was done. It was a pretty terrible time, but they said no surgery, just go heal. So I was sent home, and I couldn't move for about 8 days or so. I just laid out on the couch. My wife had to come and bring me water and food to drink. I was like dosed up on heavy duty painkillers. I couldn't even sit up. Um, but from there, they gave me a walker. After a couple weeks, I was able to at least move a little. I think I had a wheelchair, then a walker. I don't even remember at this point. Um, and then from the walker, I moved to a cane, and they brought me over to a physical therapist who was a long tabber. And I said, hey, I was supposed to go to selection in a couple of weeks, but I switched with a buddy, so I'll go in 3 months. Do you think I'm good to train? And he said, man, if you can take the pain, just go for it. So I went from a cane to starting to walk and then jog through pretty immense pain. But I was determined to go to selection. So I had this like hasty, pretty terrible rehab that I just rushed through so I could get to selection. And then every night I was in the med shed, just putting ice in bags and just laying out. When we were doing rucks, I'd have to take several dudes to lift me off the ground. I was coming in last in every run. I'm like, oh man, they're not going to take me. There's no way. I'm slow. But in civil affairs, they're just as interested in your confidence and your intelligence and your ability to think that it all balanced out. So I got back. I was selected, and then I just started charging forward. But I lost a couple buddies around that time that I was going to head to selection. My best friend and a couple other guys, and uh, I just wanted to start healing. My body was in terrible shape. My mind was in a terrible place, and I just wanted to move through it. And my wife recommended I try yoga. And at first, I was really resistant to it. Coming from the line, like the last thing you wanted to do, at least, back then, like you didn't talk about yoga. Like it wasn't. I think the environment was a little different than when I got out of the army. But I started doing yoga, and I found, man, some immense healing, and I stuck with it, and eventually led me to want to create American Yogi, which was an attempt to create a vehicle. Now it's a vehicle in motion of helping others find their healing through physical and mental pain. And now my life essentially revolves around that healing and bringing it to others, and all because of that back 2015.
That's pretty significant. But could you tell us how yoga has helped you cope with that physical and mental trauma of that injury?
Yeah, I mean, especially in the military at that time, like it wasn't, and I'm sure it's still, pretty the same, pretty much how it was on the line. Like, you don't talk about your emotions, you don't let yourself feel. You drink like a fish. You just try to keep pushing forward for, yourself, your family, for your guys. And it's not about anything but just getting the job done and survival. Yoga taught me like really early on, really quickly that it wasn't just about survival. It was about being with it all, being with your emotions, being with the present moment, being with the darkness, being with the light inside yourself, and allowing yourself an opportunity to breathe, because we're always focused on, either in the military, we're focused on the next thing we're doing, or we're AAR in the last thing we did, or we're getting ready for the next push. And you never really stop and slow down. Yoga allowed me a chance to finally slow down and figure out what it was going on in my head. And it wasn't a cure-all, and it's still not a cure-all, but it's a really good place to start.
So when you discovered yoga while you were still in the service, now as you transitioned out of the service into, I guess what they say, civilian world, did you have any problem making that transition
Yeah, that transition's hard as hell.
for
I've
anyone?
only heard of, yeah, for anyone. I've only heard of a couple guys that had like a really easy transition. I think the vast majority of us, even if you get out and you're like, you have a job lined up, and things are, I mean, a lot of guys, they move into contracting right after, so they're doing the same thing they were, beforehand. It's still tough. Yeah, I struggled a lot when I got out. I thought that since I was a med board, so I spent a year basically out of uniform, just doing my appointments before I got out. But even after spending that last year of transition, I got out, and it was like a slap in the face. Like, well, what do I do with all this freedom now? It doesn't. My guy, the boys are gone. Like, my sense of, it's not even purpose. It's a more identity. Was so wrapped around who I was as a soldier and the things that I had accomplished, that I didn't know what to do when I became a stay-at-home dad. When I got out, I didn't know what to do. Um, when I woke up in the morning, I didn't know how to deal with anxiety when I wasn't going to go to work and throw back a six pack with my NCOIC. Like, the ways that I coped when I was in the army, were not going to work on the outside. And it took me, um, it took a long time for me to be okay on the outside, like months and months and months. I'm still, obviously, we're all always healing, right? We're all always, on this path of finding ourselves and, our passions. But it took a while. The thing that I tell people is, when they ask, like, what's the best piece of advice I can give you, as a veteran when you get out, it's just to say yes to things, to all the things. People offer, hey, there's this thing for vets, we're going to go scuba diving, you want to come? Sure, I'll go scuba diving. Hey, there's this thing for vets, we're going to go hiking. Yeah, sure, I'm going to go hiking. And I just kept doing the things, waiting for everything to click. And I used my resources. Heroic Hearts Project, I went on a retreat with them last March, down to Peru, an ayahuasca retreat for veterans. And I credit that for saving me. When I first got out, like, I was in a place where I wasn't sure I wanted to live anymore. I just didn't. I didn't know what it was, but I was tired of hurting. I was tired of being in pain. Even though I had a yoga practice, and yoga practice helped me a lot, and a meditation practice and mindfulness had helped me a lot. But there were some really core things that I'd never dealt with, that I had to deal with to move on as a human and as a veteran.
Oh, ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca. Explain that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yes, I mean I'm not an expert by any means, but ayahuasca it's a really powerful hallucinogen. They in the Amazon and in Central and South America, they've been using it for generations and generations, through a shamanic practice to heal. But only fairly recently have Westerners been really uh, I don't know what the right word is necessarily, but Westerners have been going down and making trips to work with these shamans and work with the medicine to heal. So I was invited, with Heroic Hearts, who that's what they do. They help bring veterans through psychedelic retreats to help them heal from post traumatic stress or mostly it's post traumatic stress and kind of the effects of service. But if you know mushrooms, psilocybin it's essentially just think of a really really powerful version of it's a different medicine, but it allows you to access parts of your soul or parts of your mind that there's no way that you could get to without the help of the medicine.
What's interesting to me is it's instead of trying to like solve the symptoms of what we're dealing with, whether it be PTSD or stressors, and trying to create new ways, we're actually looking back to others, and because other folks have solved this problem for us before, and now, especially like you said, though Westerners, so the U.S. is being more open to trying to experiment what has worked from these ancient civilizations that have been carrying on and using these for a long, long time very effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I was on every antidepressant that the Army could prescribe. I had been on every benzo that the Army could prescribe, Klonopin, Ativan. I've been on alpha blockers, beta blockers, for nightmares, for insomnia, trazodone. You name the different sleep meds, they gave me that. And in the end, nothing ever worked. Like I just felt all it did was numb me and just make me feel sluggish and disconnected. And I was miserable on it and I was miserable off it. Um, but these old cultures, like the approach is completely different. The meta the pharmaceuticals that were prescribed are just to kind of wash over us and keep us disconnected from ourselves, whereas these ancient medicines, they actually make you connect to yourself and they make you look at yourself. And until we actually work through these issues that these traumas that we've compounded over the years, they're always going to live inside of us. So I mean, there's ancient wisdom there that the West has only begun to tap into, and is still extremely taboo, in the States.
And I follow you on socials, and I did see that you sent your dad there correct recently. And you sent a beautiful letter. If you guys don't follow, please give them a follow. It was an amazing letter to read. So how was his experience? Has he come back yet?
Yeah, he saw me. I left actually a year ago. I'm heading on a different retreat again this year, so this was my year anniversary was this week, and my dad saw the unbelievable change that that ayahuasca made in me, or that I made in myself. And he had suffered a lot of trauma as a kid, and he dealt with anxiety and depression and pretty seriously. His brother committed suicide when he was younger, like just some serious life stuff that I think he felt that there was no other place to turn, and that's honestly how I felt as well. That I had tried everything and I was still hurting. So he gave it a shot, and I sent him off. And yeah, that letter was all the advice all the things that I wish somebody had told me before I went, and in the end, really just about trusting the process. And so he went down and he got back from Peru just over a month ago, and he's a new person. He came back and I asked him how he was doing, and he said, I'm good. And in my dad's life, he's never said that. I've never heard him say that before. He's lighter. He's in touch with his emotions again. He can express love without judgment. Yeah, it gives you a clean slate, gives you a fresh start. You know, we I'm an advocate of therapy, of talk therapy and sound healing, and you name the modality, I'm into it, and I've tried it. But when it comes to traditional therapies, like we always have filters, right? Like there's always things that we're not going to go into. We can always choose not to talk about certain things. But with the medicine, you go down to the jungle. The medicine doesn't give you a choice of what you're going to deal with and what you're not going to deal with. It gives you what you need, and a lot of times that's the really tough stuff that you haven't been able to face prior. So yeah, so I came back and I had purged a lot of that darkness, and he came back and he came back purged and fresh as well. And it's not a magic bullet. It's a pill that the work kind of starts when you get home. So he's in the work right now, but it's beautiful to see. It's you see on the outside what you feel on the inside, and he sees love for the first time in his life, and it's amazing.
What made you want to go that route? And nothing was it something particular?
You mean the route of like psychedelic medicine?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I had tried everything else. I had tried every drug that every pharmaceutical that I could try, and I was still in pain, and I was tired of feeling pain, and I didn't yeah, I didn't want to live like that anymore, and I didn't know where else to go. I basically figured, well, if it works, great. If it doesn't, I'm back to where I started. I was tired of hurting. I was tired of my addictions. I was tired of my drinking. That I came back and I don't even bite my nails anymore. Like I don't want to. I don't want to go back into any old vice. Like I don't drink anymore, and it's not even like it's hard not to drink. I just don't crave it. I don't want it. The idea of it, of bringing every once in a while I have a beer because I enjoy the flavor of it, right? I like love the taste of beer. So every once in a while, like I think I've had 5 drinks this past year because I enjoy the taste. So every once in a while, but I don't crave it. You come back from something like that, and all the things that were harming you in the past, like you don't want anymore. And I had a lot of things. I spent 20 years. I was always on something, whether it was natural over the counter something, or it was alcohol, or whether it was prescription medication. I was getting in car accidents because I was so slow for my medication. I was disconnected from my family, from myself, and I was in pain. I was just in immense pain, and I was tired of hurting. I'd been depressed for as long as I remember. I had anxiety for as long as I could remember, and I needed something. Nothing else was working, and came in and saved my life. Themselves the opportunity um, to do it. Despite the taboo of it, despite the fear of it as well.
And I think what you said earlier, just a few minutes ago, about being able to deal with the stuff that we don't bring up. For me, I've heard about psychedelics before, and I've listened to Tim Ferriss talk about it and some of the other podcasts, and I never really knew or understood what would drive me to do it until you mentioned it right there, where it's when I talk to someone or I go into therapy, like, there's even parts of my mind that I don't want to go my own self, right? There's even parts that I don't deal with because they're very difficult. But going on a trip like
Yeah.
that and taking the medicine ayahuasca takes everything apart, and you have nothing else to do besides deal with it. I think for me, that's a big selling point for me, and I'm like, yeah, all right, well, maybe I'm gonna put it a little higher on my list of things to do.
You know what?
Yeah.
I take medication, and I've always heard it, like it's always been sworn by some I guess some athletes and some political figures. Well, Joe Rogan swears on it. So does Mike Tyson. I think Aaron Rodgers just went on a trip to decide whether he was going to retire or not.
Oh wow.
And I mean I hear excellent things about it. I mean, it's something that piques my interest as well.
I mean, sorry, go for it.
No, yeah, I think we're just kind of looking.
Oh,
We're kind of astonished
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
ourselves, right? Like again, I
yeah.
feel like it's one of those things that you hear about, but having somebody on to actually talk about it and dive into some of the nuances of it, and I can hear the explanations, and I can hear the psychedelics, like I said, I'm curious about it, but hearing it from you just feels different.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll put it this way. Um, yeah, doing ayahuasca in the jungle, not just like going to somebody because there's it exists in the States, but it's nothing like the experience and the medicine in the Amazon. But going down there and doing a week with the medicine, sitting with the medicine for a few ceremonies was absolutely the hardest thing I ever did in my life. Full stop. Like not even a close second. Like doesn't matter like the death I've witnessed, doesn't matter the the war, the conflict, the none of that even came close to how hard the experience to ayahuasca was. But as hard as it was rewarding, equally as rewarding. Um, I mean, afterward, like when I got home, I stayed in my room for a week. Couldn't really leave I was so sensitive. I was just like I just needed to just sit and breathe and journal and just kind of settle. They describe it as like a snake when it sheds its skin, it has to slither through the thorns, and then once the skin comes off, it's raw, so it has to go under a cold rock, and it curls up and just stays there till its skin starts to grow back enough for it to re-enter the world. And I have those thorns, where the snake, the skin is the old trauma. Um, and it allows us eventually to re-enter the world. You re-enter it as the person you want to be, not as the person that your trauma and your difficulties has made you into. And it was such a profound experience, even as hard as it was, that I signed up to go next month down to Mexico for psilocybin and 5-MeO DMT to do another retreat, because I know no matter what happens down there, no matter how hard it is, that I will continue to heal and continue to open my heart and let the dark sit with my darkness, let it go, and let in that love, let in the parts of myself that I know I need to be for my children, my wife, and my community, and those around me.
Now, with me, I got a real like addictive personality or addictive trait. Is it something like okay, like tell me if I'm wrong. I might be completely wrong. Is it like a high that you're going to continue to want to chase?
It's the opposite. It's the exact opposite. Like you want nothing to do with it when it's over. Like you want to be as far away from. I didn't want to take. That's what I'm saying. Like even bite my nails. I didn't want to take like Benadryl when I got back. I didn't want anything to touch my mind for a while. It is crazy difficult, and it is not necessarily, at least for me. Some people, they have very euphoric, pleasant experiences. For me, it was a very hard experience. Um, but no, it's not something you crave. It's something you sit with, and when it's over, you feel like you've had your fill. And um, I don't know anybody who rushes back to ayahuasca or psilocybin. You know, but trust me, I get it. Like I can always feel myself like with alcohol. I was an alcoholic for 20 years. I didn't realize it until I sat with the medicine. I was taking kratom, over the counter, because my pain has been so bad over the years that kratom. A buddy's like, hey, he's an amputee. I think he's an above the no below. Either way, he lost his arm in Afghanistan, and he said, "Here, try this kratom. Like it'll help ease some of your pain. It's like a natural opioid. It's these leaves that are, I think, from Thailand. They crush up and put into pills, and you can buy it at like gas station stuff. I got it from a lab, like lab tested, and it was great. My mood would increase, my pain would decrease." But when I was in Syria, I was taking like 10, 12 grams of kratom a day, which is like it's stupid amount. And then I stopped it, and I like DT'd hard. Like the way I am, if I find something that makes me feel good or less pain, or at least the old me, I would want more of it. I was the same way, and I'm just like, okay, this is my thing now because this is what makes me feel good. But yeah, ayahuasca ridded me of all of it, like all those old, because it's like the things that made you be addicted to things, or it dissipates with you purge. You whether you throw it up, scream it out, cry it out, move your body, thrash about it leaves with it.
And here's the thing that I've heard is the hard things that you go through and you put yourself through are generally what you're chasing and will promote you, right? Like you said, wrestling was difficult for you, but you stayed in it and you got very good. You got the highs that you were chasing, right? You got your successes out of that. Civil affairs, wanting to go to selection was very, very difficult, and you put your body through heck because of it. But because of that, you achieved your ultimate goal. And now here we are talking about ayahuasca. And you said the most difficult thing you've ever done, bar none, compared to all of that. And still, now here you are present to be a better version of Phil than you ever were before.
Yeah, that's a cool pattern to see. I like that. I never quite thought I never quite thought about it that way in the the course of my timeline. But I teach my kids the same thing. Like the hard things are where the where the real meat is. Like that's where the like there's that satisfaction comes from doing hard things. Like putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. I loved going overseas and like sitting face to face with somebody that um, in a tough situation. And I'm a Jewish kid from Florida, and I had to sit in a meeting with a governor in a ISIS influenced town overseas and tell him to cover up the ISIS graffiti on his walls. And they like it just it was really hard, and then asking me about why Americans burn Qurans and um, asking me about our freedom of speech with I like putting myself in tough situations. I like having to work my way through them. Yeah, and this ayahuasca and healing is no different. Like it's easy to say, I'm going to go easy on myself. This is my and we give ourselves that compassion, we give ourselves that ease. But unless you're putting yourself into your discomfort, you're always going to sit with that discomfort.
Man, I think we're gonna close the entire month of August and go go on a journey.
Yes, I love that. Well, I
Well,
do want to make
let me know. I'll help connect you.
sweet. Yeah, you got it. I do want to make sure that we hit on this Live American Yogi experience. So what is the mission behind your brand?
Yeah, so American Yogi started with a mission to bring peace and bring healing modalities to people that otherwise didn't see it as an option for themselves, whether it be yoga, meditation, or just the idea and the concepts behind mindfulness and a mindful way of living. And it started with creating conversation with T-shirts, and from that it sort of evolved into this community of people that all wanted healing, that were coming from similar places. And now our push is to, or what we have created is to be a retreat company. So what we've started doing is leading retreats down in Guatemala, and later this year we'll lead retreats in Costa Rica, where we teach yoga. And I teach it with Andy Manzi, who started the Warrior Surf Foundation a few years ago. So he teaches the surf side of the house, and I teach the yoga and meditation side of the house. And um, we leave a lot of room for healing and growth and transformation. We do ceremonies down there. We have like really cool, unique experiences, very authentic experiences with members of the community that we operate in down there. So our goal really is to just bring healing to as many people as possible, and they can help find that within themselves. I tell people I'm not, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm an instructor, but really I'm just a mirror. I just want to be here to create space for people to feel what they need to feel and grow how they need to grow.
Be the mirror. I love that.
I like that too, man. That one hit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was
what?
talking to Rocco the other day. Rocco says he likes to say he's the lighthouse. I thought that was really cool that we both see it pretty similarly.
How did you meet up with Rocco? How did that work out?
Dude, I don't even know. I'll be honest. It's just the world of social media. Like somehow we cross paths on there, and I think I don't know. I saw I was talking the other day. I said you don't meet a lot of truly genuine people in your everyday life very often. And
It's true.
when we crossed paths, I just felt there was something genuine and kindred in him. He's on the path of healing and to help others heal, and it's coming from a place of authenticity. And I didn't feel like it was, and as I know it's not. You see you see influencers, and they're doing certain things because they want to do certain things in the public eye, whereas Rockus, from what I know, and he's the kind of guy that does it because he thinks it's the right thing to do, or he knows it's the right thing to do. And I think when you put yourself in the world like that, you meet other people that feel the same way, and somehow the universe brings you together, and you create what you're intended to create together.
Yeah, I believe that strongly.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point because we have a similar story where Raul started all of this with just a t-shirt brand, right? Charlie Mike Continue Mission, and now here we are in our own studio, which is surreal. And we were talking about Rocco before you hopped on, and how I met you, and it was just like I just like being around that presence, attracting good people to the show, attracting good people that I can model around, right? That are going to push me to do other things.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. But I want to hit one more thing
Oh yeah.
on the Live American Yogi. You you had mentioned in the beginning, reading the bio and stuff, that you want to remove that stigma from men who practice yoga. Uh, how well, can you expand on this, and why do you think that this exists in the first place?
The stigma, I mean, I
Yes.
think I think it's a cultural shift that's, I don't even know where we are in it, but when I look at it from my vantage point, and when I joined the army, I was on like the very, I guess, the verge of figuring out who I was. And I thought that to be a man, you needed to be all the stereotypical version of what a man was. You're tough beyond, beyond reproach. You're stolid. You're confident. You're all these things, and none of those characteristics involved actually taking care of yourself. It was always, what you stand for, and I always thought it was really like hyper masculine things. Like we drink hard, we fight hard, and granted, I did those things. We love hard, and that's it. We just keep driving forward. But it's so damaging. It was so damaging. And when I found yoga, I stepped into the yoga studio. I was like, I did it from a place of, well, I'm a tough dude. I don't do yoga for yoga's for girls. It's not for me. But when I got in there and I started, taking to it and realizing, oh shit, like it's for everyone. Anyone with a pulse can benefit from this community. But when I walked into the room, it was me and maybe one other guy in a room full of women. And I realized really early on that, the yoga community, and this is, years ago, was not oriented towards men in the slightest. I went to a really big yoga festival, this is, where I got the idea to start American Yogi with my brother. There wasn't one, shirt there, vendor there that had anything for men. And I just felt slighted by, the community that I was growing to be a part of. Um, so what I think though is that's really just a microcosm of, our greater culture. This is, it's just not something that's marketed, geared towards, for men, especially men that come from, communities like us, like in the military. I think it's changing now. Now by the time I left, I was at Bragg. I was teaching in a studio there. I'd have at least half the room men. It was amazing to see. On my retreats, I have as many men as women. Like I love seeing that. And I think the conversation's changing, but I still think like far and wide, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that's why people like me need to be vocal and examples in the community.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of feedback have you been getting from, the men particularly that come to your studio or that do these yoga
Oh,
practices?
life changing. They came in, they'd come in expecting to get a workout, and they'd come out getting answers. I think that's what we could all hope for, right?
Dang, you ain't lying. You ain't lying. Dang, I might just give it a shot myself.
Do
You
it,
know,
sir.
I walked. I think I walked in the other day in the office, and that's what he was doing right over there on the ground. And I was like, "What the hell's wrong with you, man?
Yeah.
You all right?"
I mean, I brought
That's
I brought
it.
my mat to the studio, and I was like, because sometimes you just kind of feel out of whack, and for me, I don't know. It's like it's the breathing that helped me recenter. It's doing something physical as well, and then it's the ownership. It's mine. I can do it wherever I want. I
Absolutely,
can
it's yours.
go. And you've mentioned it in the bios, and you said on your website too. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you start from. It's just starting. I heard a
Just
great
move and breathe.
I heard a great analogy. We all know we're familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You have the white belt and the black belt, right? The two polar opposites, and which one's harder to get, right? Everybody assumes it's the black, but the white belt's actually the hardest because you have to start to get that white belt. Every belt afterwards is just continuing to show up,
Yeah.
in practice and practice. but we were on a call and you mentioned, I wanted to make sure we get this line out there. You mentioned that you find yourself being like a yoga practice while you're on the mat yourself. Can you kind of dig into that a little bit?
Oh, with jujitsu?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so like I used to go to a studio. I would teach several times a week. I would practice in a studio several times a week. My yoga now is I do it at the house, but I connect with it in the gym with jujitsu. When I'm on the mat, my breath work, my breathing. It's easy when you start to scrap. You get in kind of survival mode. You have to remind yourself like slow down, slow down. And as soon as I start to remind myself to slow down, I feel my breathing the same way I would when I'm practicing, when I'm in a really tough flow, my breath work, when your mind state, when you're rolling, especially like, so I wrestled for 10 years, but I've been doing jujitsu only a year now. And when I first started rolling, I was just like I'm sure like plenty of white belts I've seen, they just go like spastic, just like go, 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 go. But you realize really quick, like you're going to rush to failure like really, really quickly that way. But when you slow down and you're just fully immersed in the moment, you're not spazzing. You're thinking and not thinking at the same time. And in Buddhism they call it one-mindedness. And I feel like jujitsu is such an incredible, in wrestling, grappling is just an incredible expression of one-mindedness. When you're on the mat, it's just like yoga in the sense that you're thinking of nothing else but what you're doing in that moment. You're not worrying about money. You're not worrying about family stuff, relationship stuff. You're not worrying about a car payment. You're not worrying about bills or your school or nothing. All you're worried about is that moment right there, is the moment you're in. And a lot of the time you're not even thinking through. You might be when you have that second to breathe and you're like, okay, what's he doing? What am I doing? But a lot of the times you're reacting with the things that you've trained on. So your body's just truly flowing through that moment, which is something that you don't get in much other parts of your life.
Man,
Nah,
I love it.
I'm speechless.
I love it. I mean, I did. Yeah, I think we've all done a little bit of jujitsu, and we see the popularity of the sport coming back, which is awesome. And we even had a lady here recently, and she was talking how now you can see they're leaning towards yoga as a partnership with jujitsu. Like they have special stretches that say, "Hey, you know what? Work on these," and they happen to be yoga moves, and it's like it's in our minds and it's becoming more and more present. Uh, I would say parts
Yeah.
of some of the things that you guys are doing over there.
Man, I can't tell you how many guys in the gym like pull me aside afterwards and we talk through meditation, we talk through breath work, we talk through stretches they might need for different parts of their body that they're not getting right now. We talk through psychedelics because they see my attitude and I'm very open about it. Like, all we got to do is open our minds up and it's all there, waiting for us.
All right. So two last things before we wrap up. First of all, I want to make sure that we recognize you. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We see all the work that you're doing. If you guys don't know, follow Phil. It's is it Live American Yogi on Instagram?
Yeah, Live American Yogi, LIVE American Yogi.
Yeah. You can also visit the site. It's down at the bottom, liveamericanyogi.com. They've got some great apparel shirts on there for you as well. And support the movement. The biggest thing we can do is to bring awareness and be open minded to it. You've been a phenomenal guest. We really appreciate it. Do you have any call to actions for anybody out there? Any things that you'd like to make sure that they do or can do to start?
No, I mean, if you're interested and you might be a little, afraid to step into a studio or, a little, curious, like, please do hit me up directly. Like I'd be more than happy to help answer any questions offline or online on Instagram, direct. Otherwise, like, come check us out. If you want to, dive in, come see us down in Guatemala and El Paradon and we'll go surfing and do some yoga and, like your healing is just waiting for you.
Man, that's amazing. I
Let's
love
go.
it. Yeah, let's do it. Come on. So one last question for you, Phil.
Yeah.
We are Charlie Mike. So what does Charlie Mike mean to you?
Just keep going, keep pushing, have faith that you have the answers. You just need to keep pushing forward, despite when it's hard, or maybe especially when it's hard, but it will get better. It always gets better.
We appreciate it, man. Thank you for coming on the show. And we look forward to speaking to you again And don't sign off. I want to talk to you offline.
Okay.
Hey,
Hey,
again, we appreciate everybody for tuning in. Make sure you share, subscribe, like, leave a comment, leave a review, anything you can do to help get this movement going, because this is as much as you're a part of this as much as we are. And we really appreciate you guys tuning in.
and you guys, as always, Charlie Mike.